Hello and welcome to this presentation about linked data scopes. My name is Victor de Boer and this research is done together with Yvette Bonestro, Marijn Kolen and Rick Hoekstra. And we represent the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, the Royal Academy of Sciences in the Netherlands Humanities Cluster, and Huygens ING, the Historical Research Institute in the Netherlands. This research was done in the context of the CLARIA project, which is a large infrastructure project in which we try to build digital infrastructure for humanities scholars. So, linked data scopes, what are we talking about? Well, first let's look at the challenge or the opportunity that is at hand. So this starts from the observation that digital humanities research increasingly has a data component, in the sense that people are using more data, using digital tools and digital methods to assess data sets and to investigate them and to analyze them. So this ranges from tools like geovisualizations, from tools that deal with linked and connected data, etc. And also these appear more and more in publications. One of the tools that we are looking at specifically is a tool that is developed within this CLARIA infrastructure project, the CLARIA Media Suite, in which we allow audiovisual researchers to connect and investigate different data sets. So when researchers are dealing with data, they often use steps like data selection, data normalization, classification, etc. And these tie together in pipelines or workflows. And in other fields of research, reporting on these workflows has become a crucial point of reporting research, and are really important to ensure validity, transparency and reusability of the research. However, in digital humanities and humanities in general, these are rarely reported or discussed in the research publications. And that's important because these interactions in the pipeline actually change the data and makes them an important part of this historical research methodology. And the goal of data scopes and linked data scopes is to increase the reusability and transparency in the humanities research output. Because if we actually have explicit representations of these data manipulation steps, then we can assess the context in which this data was created, its quality and validity and appropriate conditions for use, as was remarked by Paul Groth and others when talking about research in general. So we also need to do this for humanities. In biomedical research and, for example, data science, machine learning, this is becoming more commonplace to also represent and make the data and the steps very explicit. So for that we need to have a method and a conceptual framework to describe and share the methodology, intermediary results, data sets and data enrichment. And all this of course leads to this ideal of fair data, but also fair workflows. So we don't start from scratch. Actually, two of the authors of this paper were the author of the original Datascopes paper, Datascopes for Digital History Research, written by Rick Hoekstra and Marijn Kolen. And there they introduce already this conceptual framework of what a datascope is. And a datascope sort of corresponds with the lens or the specific data manipulation context in which specific research holds or research results hold. So datascopes are a method to characterize the interaction between researchers and their data and the transformation of a cluster of data into a research instrument, right? So it's really a way into representing the manipulation steps that have been done in this research. What they do is they define a datascope as consisting of 5 data manipulation steps, and we'll go through them. One step is selection, so which data sets are selected, how are sources selected, so this is part of what is called corpus forming sometimes. Then data modeling is important, how are relevant elements in sources represented, and this can be done using either implicit or explicit models. Often there are a number of normalization steps, which are sort of mapping of surface formed to normalized formed, so we can think about names or dates or capitalization or decapitalization as ways of normalizing specific entries. Data linking has become part of this, especially with a variety of data sets and also the advent of the web. So what explicit and internal, explicit internal, but also external connections are established in the analysis of the data. And this can also include things like named entity resolution, for example. And then finally, classification, how are objects grouped or categorized. And this can be done using explicit concept schemes, but also implicit theories, for example. And it's important to note that this is not a linear process where one does all of these steps. Some steps might appear a lot, sometimes things appear multiple times. This is a very, let's say, iterative process in which phases inform each other. But together, all of these steps make up the scope or the lens with which specific research is reported. So that was done before this paper, but in this paper, and our main contribution, primary contribution, is that we take this conceptual framework, which is more of a qualitative framework, and make it an explicit representation. In other words, we put it into an ontology. So why do we want to do this? Well, of course, because we can then have this Datascope as a machine-readable, interpretable, explicit representation that's also shareable, and we can actually connect it to a paper. So for that we use semantic web technology, specifically RDF, RDFS, to define an ontology that allow people to actually make these machine-readable datascopes. So the Datascope's ontology basically is defined in this work. We make some permanent identifiers using the W3ID system. The central class, as in the original model, is a Datascope, and then these 5 manipulation steps are the main other classes that make up the ontological description of a Datascope. Then there are some additional classes for data sets, for selection steps, link sets, concept schemes, etc. And important also that we align this with existing ontologies in the domain. So Dublin Core, but also PROF. We link it to ontologies for other research outputs such as SPAR, and more is coming. Yeah. So if you want to have a look already, you can go to this URL here, where the ontology is found and described in more detail. What we'll do now is we'll show you a sort of overview of the ontology, which is here. And actually you can see here that the Datascope is still the most central thing. So everything is also mapped to the PROF ontology for provenance. So the Datascope is central, and then here we have the 5 main classes that correspond to these 5 data manipulation steps, and then also the notion of a data set, which is sort of the result of these steps, or some of these steps is important. And we also see here the research output, the paper itself, which is also part of the model. And it can be easily integrated with all kinds of other models that can connect to this. So how would you use it? Well, actually, the idea is that a research will not just output a research paper, but also the Datascope in which the conclusions are valid, right? And this would be an explicit representation, for example, somewhere with a permanent identifier. We'll talk a bit about that later, which it can actually be linked to the digital representation of the paper. And in this way, the two are connected, and if researchers are interested in, for example, reproducing or validating specific parts of the research, they can actually go to the Datascope. And what we're working on now is actually integrate this in tooling, for example, in, again, this Claria Media Suite, so that it would actually output the Datascope partially automated. Important is also to note that not all of these Datascope elements, or let's say the leaf nodes in this model, are necessarily data. They can also be pieces of text, right? So descriptions of the steps that are done. So we don't expect that every link set is a set of actually RDF triples. They can also be a representation, textual representation of the linking step. So that's one contribution. The other contribution is actually a preliminary validation of the model in 2 research domains, digital humanities and computational social sciences, which we'll talk about now. So what we did is we actually took papers from 2 journals that already use digital methods, so we expect to see papers that actually use these methods already quite a bit. One journal is the Digital Scholarship for Humanities journal, another is the Computational Social Science journal, to sort of show you can also use this to compare different fields of science. So what we did is we selected relatively recent papers from 2018 on, and then only selected papers with the data section, and from those that remained we selected 15 papers each from both journals. Then 6 of these articles are actually used in the development of the ontology, and 24 were then used in the validation. So sort of to check how much of the elements actually exist. Then it was assessed. First of all, a set of coding guidelines was derived to see how do we actually identify each of these elements, and these coding guidelines were based on the paper by Kohle and Hoekstra. And then it was annotated using 2 independent coders, and the results are shown here. So what we can actually see is that in all of the 24 papers for the CSS and for the DSH journal, the selection elements is reported at least once. We also see that every dataset talks about, every paper talks about at least one dataset, which is the result of the selection, and that's quite obvious if we think that if we know that actually we only selected papers with the dataset. Other interesting things is that we can actually use this to compare papers from different sources. So we can actually see that in the computation social science, more of the elements are used than in the digital humanities journal, in this specific case. And again, it's a small number, only 12 papers, but it shows that you can use these things to highlight these and sort of do meta-analyses. Okay, so that shows that, and it also shows that all of the elements were used at least in one of the 24 papers. So that shows that at least we don't have any obsolete elements there. So what we did is actually took the results of this annotation exercise and represented all of the results in these RDF format, which corresponds to these the Datascope's ontology. This resulted in 511 RDF triples, which you can actually sparkle if you were inclined to do so at this URL. So here it shows a small snippet in the bottom. So you see that's actually there. And the interesting thing is that you can of course make some interesting competency questions like show me the number of datasets for which a normalization step is registered, and get the output directly from Sparkle. So again, this is how you could use it in some sort of meta-analysis form. Okay, so of course we're not done yet. There's always more work. So what are we going to do for next steps? So this validation is very preliminary and it's a small scale. So for next steps, one of the things is to do a larger scale validation, but also to further refine the ontology. To also, for example, integrate it better with other ontologies like workflow ontologies. And then we want to integrate it into the tooling that we described. And not only the Claria Media Suite tooling, but also tools like OpenRefine, which are very commonly used by people that deal with data. And then also another thing that we're working on now is to see if we can actually make the publishing of these Datascopes more integrated with publishing scientific output. So we're looking at the nano publications scheme and a nano bench tool to actually allow researchers to quickly publish their Datascope, get a permanent identifier, an immutable identifier, which you can then include in your research output, for example, a paper. So that's it for me. So I wish you a lot of fun looking at the URL. So you can read more about Datascopes at this top URL, and then you can also look at the media suite in which we hope to integrate it. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And then I want to thank you all for listening, and I wish you all a very good day.